They say airports are gateways to the world, bustling intersections of culture, ambition, and sometimes hidden injustice. Our story unfolds at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest on the planet, where an unexpected power shift rattles the entire staff. Everything begins with a single slur the airport's manager dismissively calls a black janitor lazy, sparking a chain of events nobody saw coming. Betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption swirl together in a drama that shines a harsh light on prejudice and privilege. Stick around to see how a humble janitor ends up holding the fate of the very man who insulted him. Welcome to a story you won't soon forget. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with energy from the very first rays of dawn. Pilots hurried to briefings, flight attendants wheeled sleek carry-on luggage, and travelers lined up at security checkpoints, nerves tingling with anticipation of distant destinations. Amid this controlled chaos, James Chisholm, respected by some, feared by many, strode through the concourse in a crisp, charcoal-gray suit. He was the newly appointed deputy airport manager, groomed by the higher-ups to take the top position soon. Though not yet the official manager on paper, everyone treated him as if he already wore the crown. Following behind him, employees scrambled to look busy, aware that James noticed every smudge, every speck of dust. Underneath the glossy surfaces of the airport's shining floors lay a tension that matched the manager's unyielding glare. People spoke in hushed tones when he passed, uncertain whether they would be on the receiving end of his next scolding. James liked to think of himself as royalty in this bustling kingdom of terminals and planes. He thrived on the power dynamics, the slight bow of a junior manager, the immediate scattering of staff who spotted him from a distance. Some admired his ambition, but many whispered he was an opportunist who leveraged nepotism and cunning to climb the corporate ladder. He had arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson only 6 months prior, already holding an impressive resume from smaller airports. Yet each promotion seemed to come faster than the last. Rumor had it, his father was a senior executive at a major airline, Delta, which might explain the red carpet treatment he often received at board meetings. But James possessed an ironclad confidence that made you wonder if he truly believed he'd earned his success purely on merit. Regardless, here, he was claiming the airport as his stage and everyone else as his background actors. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of Concourse D, a silent figure methodically swept the tiled floors. His name was Marcus Gilmore, a janitor who had worked at the airport for over 15 years. Where James was flamboyant, Marcus was modest. Where James relished authority, Marcus preferred to stay in the background, doing his job with diligence and pride. He was a tall, black man with a quiet confidence that came not from titles, but from a lifetime of honest work. Marcus's day started before dawn. He clocked in, reported to his supervisor, and meticulously ensured that each inch of the floors he was assigned to gleamed. Travelers rarely noticed him, and that was okay. He didn't need applause. What Marcus appreciated were the small signs of respect, a nod, a smile, a simple greeting. He had no way of knowing that soon every spotlight at the airport would turn his way. One particular morning, as the swirling eddies of passengers converged near Gate D14, James decided to conduct a surprise cleanliness audit. Clipboard in hand, he strode down the corridor, scrutinizing every surface as if searching for evidence of a crime. Marcus, sweeping away stray napkins and gum wrappers, first felt a presence looming over him before he saw the scowl on James's face. Without any greeting, James demanded to know why a coffee stain on the floor had not been cleaned up. The manager's voice carried an accusatory edge, as though Marcus had personally spilled the coffee. Marcus explained that he had just arrived at this section and was working his way toward that stain. The answer did not placate James in the slightest. Instead, James's eyes narrowed, and those around them felt the air grow heavy. The stage was set for a moment that would echo far beyond that corridor. When Marcus continued to speak calmly, James cut him off with a harsh snap of his fingers. Lazy, he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Marcus and a few witnesses to hear. The single word hung in the air, sharp and insulting. Those within earshot exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they had truly heard what they thought they did. Marcus froze mid-sweep, his fingers tightening around the broom handle as that word, a loaded term laced with centuries of racial baggage, hit him harder than any physical blow could. James didn't even bother to apologize or clarify. He merely glared, as if daring Marcus to defend himself. Marcus, feeling anger flare in his chest, managed to rein in his emotions. He had a mortgage, children to feed, and a job he was proud of. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation with an arrogant deputy manager. Word of the incident spread quickly, riding on the gossip chains that existed in every corner of the airport. Within hours, check-in agents, baggage handlers, and even some flight crews had heard about James's scornful remark. Stories circulated, each version slightly exaggerated, but the essence remained the same. James had insulted a long-term employee with a racial stereotype. Some employees seethed with anger. Others reacted with defeat, convinced that no matter what they said or did, management would always side with someone like James. But a quiet, simmering sense of injustice began to pervade break rooms, hallways, and even the coffee shops where off-duty staff gathered. Marcus, for his part, tried to carry on as usual, yet every step he took felt heavier. He knew that ignoring the insult wasn't going to make the problem disappear. Still, he wasn't prepared for just how far the repercussions would reach. That afternoon, Marcus took his scheduled break in a staff lounge near Concourse C. It was a humble space, plastic chairs, a couple of vending machines, and a TV mounted on the wall tuned to the local news. As he sipped hot tea from a styrofoam cup, a few fellow janitors joined him. "Hey, Marcus," one of them said quietly. "I heard about—" "You know what he said?" "You all right?" Marcus nodded, though he was more tired than usual. "I'm all right. Just focusing on my job, you know." He shrugged. "They can say what they want, but I know my worth." A supervisor, passing through for a quick coffee refill, paused. "Marcus, we don't tolerate that kind of language here. If you want to file a formal complaint, I'll back you up." The comment reflected the swirling moral dilemma. Was it better to stand up for himself immediately or bide his time? Marcus wasn't sure yet. While Marcus wrestled with his next move, James met with his closest confidants, two assistant managers who owed their promotions to his favor. Inside a sleek conference room overlooking the tarmac, James leafed through audit reports, lips pursed. "We're behind on our cleanliness metrics," he declared, glancing meaningfully at one assistant. "I'm not paying these people to stand around." One assistant manager hesitated. "Actually, sir, we have one of the best track records in the country." "Most passenger complaints," James cut him off. "It can always be better." He tapped on a page. "And I know some staff members could do more." He didn't name Marcus, but his tone made it clear who he was targeting. The assistant managers nodded dutifully, though they exchanged uneasy looks. They both knew how quickly James had risen and how ruthless he could be if they contradicted him. For now they chose self-preservation over justice. Later that day, Marcus received a summons from Human Resources, an innocuous-sounding performance review meeting. He arrived to find an HR representative seated at a table with a half-inch stack of papers, attendance logs, shift schedules, cleaning audits, and more. On the surface, it appeared routine, but the HR rep's eyes flickered nervously, hinting that something more serious was going on. "We've received a report from management indicating potential gaps in your performance." The HR rep began choosing her words carefully. She pointed to a complaint about chronic tardiness, which Marcus immediately recognized as false. He had impeccable attendance records. Another complaint cited failure to address spillages promptly. Marcus recognized that coffee stain. The entire conversation reeked of a pretext to discredit him. Unfazed but disturbed, Marcus calmly presented his own records. He clarified that any tardiness was due to additional duties or instructions from supervisors. HR took notes, but Marcus suspected James was behind it all. While this Cold War was brewing, an unexpected figure from the airport's upper echelon decided to get involved. Her name was Angela Winston, a veteran flight operations manager for Delta Airlines. Angela, a middle-aged black woman with a commanding presence, had worked in aviation for nearly 3 decades. She had heard the rumors about James's slur through the grapevine and was determined to investigate. Angela had faced her own battles with discrimination in the industry. She made it her mission to protect junior staff from the same injustices she had endured. Over coffee with a friend in the HR department, Angela gleaned at enough hints to suggest that James was systematically targeting Marcus. She decided to gather hard evidence before making a move. If there was one thing Angela had learned, it was that speaking truth to power required proof that couldn't be twisted or dismissed. As the days passed, the story of James's insult kept evolving. Some versions claimed he'd used worse slurs, which only intensified the rumor mill. Concourse staff were now openly debating whether James was a racist or just a jerk. The rumor mill churned out speculation about hidden camera footage, eyewitness accounts, and possible legal action. The atmosphere felt like a powder keg waiting for one spark to ignite it. Marcus tried to maintain his composure. He went about his duties always conscious of watchful eyes. Some employees nodded sympathetically. Others whispered that he should escalate the matter. If James was so brazen to call him lazy in public, who knew what else he might do? Marcus felt torn. Part of him wanted justice, maybe even vengeance. Another part recognized the precarious financial position his family was in. He couldn't afford to lose his job over one man's vile remark. At home, Marcus's wife Tanya noticed his quiet demeanor, and the new lines of worry etched into his forehead. Over dinner, she finally confronted him. "Something's bothering you," she said, gently placing a hand over his. "What's going on at work?" Marcus sighed, hesitating before recounting the entire incident. Tanya listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "You're not just some rookie," she exclaimed. "You've been there for 15 years. You deserve respect." Their teenage son, Jamal, overheard from the next room. He stepped in, teenage indignation blazing. "Dad, you should sue him. That's discrimination." Tanya gave a supportive nod. Marcus pressed his lips together. While he appreciated their concern, he knew how these corporate battles often ended. "I need to be smart about this," he murmured. "We still have bills to pay, and I can't risk losing everything." James interpreted Marcus's silence as acquiescence. He assumed Marcus was too timid or complacent to fight back. Buoyed by this assumption, James became even more brazen. He began micromanaging the janitorial team, forcing them to adhere to impossible schedules and blaming them for trivial oversights. Morale plummeted. Some younger staff members considered quitting, while older staff like Marcus tried to endure. James strutted through the airport halls, greeting airline executives with a politician's smile, then berating frontline employees moments later. In conference meetings, he criticized the maintenance crew for unacceptable inefficiencies, pointing to minor details, like a few footprints on a newly mopped floor, as evidence of widespread incompetence. Each remark was a thinly veiled attack on Marcus's competence, fueling the rumor that James wanted him fired. The tension was no longer confined to Concourse D. It spilled into the entire airport ecosystem, affecting everyone from baggage handlers to security personnel. Amid this tightening vice of hostility, Angela Winston received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to have witnessed James harassing Marcus and was willing to provide a statement. They also mentioned overhearing James boast about his ability to get rid of anyone who couldn't keep up. Angela forwarded the email to HR and demanded a thorough investigation. Yet the HR department was in a delicate position. James's father was rumored to have friends in high places, and no one wanted to risk their own career by poking the hornet's nest. Undeterred, Angela decided it was time for a more direct approach. She scheduled a private meeting with Marcus, inviting him to share his side of the story. Marcus was apprehensive, but accepted. He saw Angela as someone with real influence who might actually help if he was brave enough to lay everything on the table. They met in Angela's office, a small but orderly space filled with aviation awards, model airplanes, and a massive window overlooking the tarmac. Angela offered Marcus a seat and a cup of coffee. Then she simply asked him to start from the beginning. In a calm, steady voice, Marcus recounted the day James called him lazy, the subsequent HR meeting, and the micromanagement that felt like personal harassment. Angela listened without interrupting, taking notes and nodding empathetically. She asked a few clarifying questions, but mostly let Marcus talk. When he finished, she set down her pen. "Marcus, I believe you. I've spoken to others who corroborate your story." She paused, her voice turning serious. "I'm going to help, but I need you to understand this may escalate." Marcus felt both relief and anxiety. He nodded grateful, but aware that the stakes had just been raised. Angela's plan was methodical. First, she collected more witness statements. She reached out to the flight attendants, gate agents, even the barista at the coffee stand near gate D14. Anyone who might have heard or seen James's derogatory comment. Second, she encouraged Marcus to formally document every interaction with James from that point forward, including dates, times, and the nature of the conversation. Third, she arranged a discreet meeting with the airport's senior HR director, a friend from her early days in aviation. While Angela strategized, James remained blissfully unaware, continuing his daily routine of bullying and belittling. Every day, he found a new complaint against the cleaning staff, which everyone knew pointed to Marcus. But now behind the scenes, a file was growing. A file that would soon become impossible for management or the airport's board of directors to ignore. Marcus's break times became a mental respite from the tension. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the airport cafeteria, he found himself standing behind an older gentleman who looked vaguely familiar. The man turned and smiled. "Marcus," right startled. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. Do I know you?" "I'm Robert Connolly," the man replied. "I work as an aviation consultant for Delta. We crossed paths a few years back in the staff lounge. You probably don't remember." Marcus did remember the name. Connolly had once praised the janitorial team for rescuing a laptop he left behind. They chatted about everyday things. Then Robert leaned in, lowering his voice. "I've heard some disturbing rumors about the management here. If you ever need a witness to vouch for your character, count me in." Marcus shook his hand, a sense of gratitude flooding his chest. Allies were appearing from unexpected corners. While piecing together the puzzle of James's behavior, Angela discovered an interesting pattern from his previous jobs. He had a history of short stints at smaller airports, 3 to 6 months, never longer than a year. Even though his resume presented these as upward moves, Angela found subtle references to personnel conflicts and cultural fit issues buried in old HR documents. It suggested a pattern of problematic conduct that had been glossed over, possibly thanks to his family's connections. Intrigued, Angela broadened her investigation. She emailed a contact at one of James's former workplaces, a regional airport in Texas. The reply she received confirmed her suspicions. James had been asked to resign after multiple complaints of discriminatory remarks. None of it was in any official record, but the oral history was consistent. Angela realized that if she could prove this pattern, it would strengthen the case against him immeasurably. Fueled by arrogance, James decided to launch a cleanliness crackdown targeting the janitorial team's schedules. Effective immediately, all janitors were required to arrive 30 minutes before their shifts without additional pay to prepare their stations. Any tardiness beyond 5 minutes would result in a written warning. This unilateral decision sparked outrage among the staff. Many had childcare duties or lengthy commutes, but James shrugged off their concerns, insisting it was non-negotiable. When Marcus calmly pointed out the unfairness of unpaid work, James exploded in front of several witnesses, calling Marcus incompetent and a drain on the team. The ugly confrontation further solidified what many suspected: James was intentionally harassing Marcus. Worse, James's public meltdown opened the door for new allegations. This time, multiple staff members witnessed the outburst. Phones were discreetly recording, capturing the manager's venomous tirade in all its unfiltered glory. Social media has a way of magnifying small sparks into raging fires. A junior staffer uploaded a 15-second clip of James's tirade onto a private group chat, which then got shared beyond its intended circle. Before long, the video found its way onto a public platform, garnering thousands of views in a matter of hours. It wasn't a mainstream sensation yet, but enough people saw it to spark heated discussions, especially among airport employees and local Atlanta residents. At first, James remained oblivious, immersed in the echo chamber of his own superiority. Meanwhile, Angela and Marcus watched the situation unfold with a mix of hope and apprehension. On one hand, the public exposure could force the airport's leadership to take swift action. On the other, James might retaliate against Marcus even more harshly. Either way, the clock was now ticking, and the final showdown loomed on the horizon. The higher-ups at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport soon caught wind of the viral clip. A crisis management team was hastily assembled to address the growing PR nightmare. The last thing they wanted was the word racist splashed across national news outlets in connection with one of the world's busiest airports. Though James was the primary culprit, the airport's reputation was also on the line. Legal counsel advised the airport to conduct a thorough investigation, cautioning them to remain neutral and not to jump to conclusions, at least publicly. Internally, however, senior executives were furious. Hartsfield-Jackson prided itself on diversity and had frequently boasted about its inclusive work environment. Now, one manager's misconduct threatened to unravel years of community goodwill. Angela's carefully prepared file and the myriad witness statements gained renewed importance. This was no longer a small HR issue. It was a potentially career-ending scandal for James and a seismic embarrassment for the airport. A pivotal meeting was called in one of the airport's top-floor conference rooms, featuring large windows overlooking runways teeming with aircraft. The attendees included the airport's director, the head of HR, and a couple of board members from the City Council's Aviation Committee. James arrived in an expensive suit, his swagger tempered but still evident. Angela was also invited along with the HR director who had been collecting evidence. Marcus was told to stand by in case they needed his first-hand account. The tension in the room was palpable. The director began by outlining the seriousness of the allegations, referencing the viral video and complaints of discriminatory behavior. James attempted to maintain composure, but his defensiveness was clear. He insisted the entire situation was overblown and claimed the video had been taken out of context. Yet the witnesses' statements told a very different story. Angela presented her meticulously organized file, replete with signed statements from staff members who had heard James's insults or witnessed his confrontations. She also included background checks from James's previous employment, which hinted at a pattern of racial and discriminatory issues. The board members skimmed through the documents, exchanging grave looks. The head of HR weighed in, confirming that multiple employees had come forward to provide consistent accounts of James's behavior. James tried to downplay each piece of evidence, claiming it was part of a smear campaign. He cited his track record of improving operational efficiencies, pointing to metrics he believed highlighted his successes. But no amount of corporate jargon could mask the damage done by that video or the weight of the testimonies. The more James spoke, the more the board members' faces hardened, signaling their growing skepticism of his excuses. After hours of deliberation, the director requested Marcus's presence to hear his version firsthand. Marcus stepped into the conference room, his heart pounding. He locked eyes with James, who sat stiffly, jaw clenched in anger or fear, perhaps both. Softly but with resolve, Marcus described the initial incident, the word lazy, and how it made him feel. He talked about the subsequent micromanagement, the HR complaint, and James's most recent tirade. His voice never wavered, though each word carried the weight of dignity that had been threatened. Angela nodded encouragingly as Marcus testified. Others around the table took copious notes. When Marcus finished, the room was quiet for several seconds. Finally, the director thanked Marcus for his honesty and asked him to wait outside. As he left, Marcus noted the uneasy expression on James's face, sensing that the tide had turned. Once Marcus had exited, the board held a closed-door discussion. Though raised voices occasionally leaked through the walls, the details remained private. The wait felt like an eternity to Marcus, who sat alone in a hallway chair, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. Angela passed by, briefly offering a reassuring pat on his shoulder before heading back into the meeting. Inside, James resorted to desperate measures, threatening to bring in his own lawyers, name-dropping influential family friends, and casting unfounded aspersions on Angela and Marcus. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Each new defense James attempted was methodically dismantled by the testimonies and records. By the end, he was a man, cornered sweat beading on his forehead, despite the room's cool air conditioning. The board realized they not only had to address James's misconduct, but also demonstrate to the public that such behavior had no place at Hartsfield-Jackson. Later that afternoon, the director called Marcus back into the conference room, where James remained seated. The director spoke clearly. "We have carefully reviewed all the evidence. We cannot allow discriminatory behavior to tarnish our reputation or harm our employees. Effective immediately, Mr. Chisholm, you are relieved of your duties. Your employment at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is terminated." James's face went pale. He tried to stammer a response, but the director silenced him with a raised hand. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. We will also conduct an internal compliance review and consider legal actions if necessary. In contrast, Marcus was commended for his professionalism and courage. The director apologized on behalf of the airport for the mistreatment he had endured. Even as relief flooded through him, Marcus felt a twinge of disbelief. The man who had tormented him had just been fired right before his eyes. In the days that followed, word spread that James was gone. Airport staff took a collective sigh of relief, though the story circulating was much more dramatic. Rumor had it that the janitor James called lazy was indirectly responsible for his downfall. In break rooms and online chats, employees cheered the poetic justice, a manager undone by his arrogance, his cruelty brought to light by the very person he sought to demean. The press picked up bits of the story. Local news stations ran segments titled "Airport Manager Ousted Amid Racism Allegations." Though Marcus's name wasn't always mentioned publicly, he preferred privacy. He became a silent hero among many staff. Some referred to the outcome as James got fired by the janitor. He mocked a sensational spin that wasn't entirely literal, but captured the satisfying sense of karmic retribution that had swept through Hartsfield-Jackson. With James gone, the airport's atmosphere changed almost overnight. The tightened regulations he had imposed on the janitorial staff were rolled back, restoring fair hours and pay conditions. The HR department, spurred by the scandal, initiated inclusivity workshops to ensure better awareness and prevention of workplace discrimination. Morale soared. Marcus went about his job with a renewed sense of dignity. He'd never sought fame, nor did he relish anyone's downfall. What mattered to him was that he could walk the corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson without the looming specter of James's cruelty. His co-workers greeted him warmly, and even strangers offered grateful smiles. The airport wasn't perfect. It remained a massive, complex institution with its share of challenges, but a genuine effort was being made to ensure that employees like Marcus were treated with respect, and that in Marcus's eyes was progress worth celebrating. The airport's board of directors issued a formal press release. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, is committed to fostering a diverse and inclusive environment. Following a thorough investigation into allegations of discriminatory behavior by a member of our management team, we have taken decisive action. We will continue to work diligently to uphold our values and support all employees in a safe, respectful workplace. The statement was widely covered by local media and mentioned briefly in national outlets. Behind the corporate language lay the real story. The airport had made an example of James Chisolm. His dismissal sent a powerful message that no matter one's rank or connections, hateful behavior would not be tolerated. While some cynics questioned whether the decision was purely motivated by PR concerns, most employees appreciated the outcome. The tide was turning, and Hartsfield-Jackson wanted the world to know it. Marcus found himself reflecting on the ordeal during quieter moments. He realized that what started as an insult turned into a full-blown moral battle, one that tested his patience, self-worth, and belief in justice. He also saw how crucial it was to have allies who refused to remain silent. Angela Winston, the HR professionals who risked their own positions to gather evidence, and the witnesses who gave statements despite fears of retaliation. He learned that dignity could be found in the unlikeliest of places, including a job many take for granted. A janitor's role might seem humble, but it's integral to the airport's daily function. And more importantly, no one, regardless of their title, has the right to strip another person of their respect. Marcus had faced prejudice before, but never so overtly from someone in power. Yet in this instance, truth prevailed, and it made him all the more resilient. Angela Winston invited Marcus to a modest celebration in her office. She'd arranged a platter of sandwiches, fruit, and drinks. A few others who helped behind the scenes dropped by to share their congratulations. Angela raised a small paper cup in a toast to Marcus, to doing the right thing, no matter how tough it is. Marcus felt humbled by the gesture. He thanked everyone for their unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it alone," he admitted. "I'm just grateful that people were willing to listen and stand with me." He glanced at Angela, remembering the moment she said she believed him without question. The entire saga underscored how vital it was for people in leadership to use their influence for good. And Angela had done exactly that, transforming what could have been a quiet injustice into an airport-wide stand against discrimination. A few days after James's termination, Marcus received a call from the airport's main office. He was asked to come in for a meeting with the director, no further details provided. Anxiety fluttered in his stomach. Had something else gone wrong? Upon arriving, he was ushered into an office where the director shook his hand warmly. "Marcus, your professionalism throughout this ordeal hasn't gone unnoticed," the director began. "We understand you've been at the airport for a long time. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to advance." Marcus blinked, taken aback. The director explained they had a new role in facilities coordination, still hands-on, but with greater responsibilities, better pay, and the chance to oversee a small team. Marcus felt a wave of disbelief. He'd never even entertained the idea of a promotion after so many years as a janitor. This development was beyond his wildest expectations. When Marcus returned home that evening, Tanya was waiting anxiously. The moment he mentioned the promotion offer, she let out an exuberant shout and wrapped her arms around his neck. Their son Jamal grinned widely and clapped Marcus on the back. In a single moment, the frustrations, humiliation, and fear they had endured felt validated. Marcus's resilience had not only preserved his livelihood, but elevated it. They spent the evening celebrating with a simple, home-cooked dinner. Jamal asked Dad, "Does this mean you're like a supervisor now?" Marcus laughed. "Kind of. I'll be working with a team, making sure different facility needs are coordinated." Tanya placed a slice of celebratory cake in front of Marcus. "You deserve this," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "After everything you deserve, every bit of recognition." Marcus smiled, his heart full, feeling the weight of the past few weeks begin to lift. James Chisholm departed Hartsfield-Jackson in disgrace. His severance was minimal, and rumors suggested his father's friends had withdrawn their support, unwilling to defend such blatant misconduct. Security escorted him past the very concourse he once ruled with an iron fist. A few employees who had borne the brunt of his tyranny watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. He silently packed up his office, sliding awards and personal items into a cardboard box. His once confident stride had become a shuffle, and the urgent phone calls he made to salvage his reputation went unanswered. Some felt pity, others felt he got exactly what he deserved. As he exited the airport's sliding doors for the final time, he passed a row of janitorial staff, their bright reflective vests shining under the fluorescent lights. Not one of them acknowledged him, but their presence was a stark reminder of his undoing. With James gone, Hartsfield-Jackson seemed to breathe easier. In the weeks that followed, the airport implemented new training programs focusing on employee rights and anti-discrimination policies. Marcus began his transition into the facilities coordination role. Though initially nervous, he discovered he had a knack for organizing work schedules, allocating resources, and ensuring the environment was as immaculate as ever. The staff respected him not just because of his new title, but because he had earned their trust through years of hard work. Whenever he strolled through the terminals clipboard in hand instead of a broom, he'd catch the eye of a fellow janitor or a security guard, and they'd share a nod or smile of camaraderie. A sense of unity took root among the employees, a renewed belief that justice could be served no matter how bleak things might seem. It was in many ways the dawn of a better era for everyone at the airport. Late one evening, long after the final wave of international arrivals had cleared customs, Marcus Gilmore stood alone beside a panoramic window overlooking runway 5L. The terminal behind him was quiet, the usual clamor of rolling luggage and boarding calls replaced by a peaceful hum, vacuum cleaners in the distance, muted conversations among overnight staff, and the occasional ding of an elevator bell. The moon hung low over the horizon, casting a faint silvery glow across the tarmac, where jets sat still and sleeping like titans at rest. Marcus placed a hand on the cool glass, his reflection staring back at him. There were more lines on his face now, more silver at his temples, but his eyes were steady eyes that had seen the worst and endured. He let out a slow breath, as if exhaling months of tension he hadn't realized he'd still been carrying. This exact window had become his favorite place at the airport, a hidden vantage point where he could pause and look out at the machinery of the world moving around him. But tonight, it was more than a pause. It was a reckoning. He thought back to that morning near Gate D14, when James Chisholm had hurled the word lazy at him, a word soaked in centuries of prejudice and weaponized disrespect. In that instant, Marcus had felt the weight of every janitor, every quiet worker who had ever been treated as less than human. He had clenched his broom tightly, not in defense, but in defiance, and chosen not to retaliate, but to endure. And somehow, that moment, small, private, humiliating, had lit a fuse. If Angela Winston hadn't believed him, if the HR staff hadn't dared to whisper truths, if the video hadn't surfaced, the story could have easily ended with Marcus out of a job, and James still swaggering through the terminals. One moment, one variable could have changed everything. That realization left Marcus both humbled and quietly awestruck. Life didn't always reward justice, but this time, somehow it had. Behind him, he could faintly hear the chatter of overnight cleaning crews starting their shift. Some of them were new faces brought on in recent weeks. Others had been there as long as Marcus, if not longer. But they all looked at him differently now, not as a supervisor, not as a symbol, but as someone who had stood his ground. He glanced at his clipboard, now covered in schedules and maintenance reports instead of floor assignments. It was a small change on paper, but carried enormous weight. He wasn't just keeping the airport clean anymore, he was helping to reshape its culture. As a plane taxied in the distance, its blinking lights slicing through the fog, Marcus whispered a quiet truth to himself. Sometimes, fate bends the right way. He turned from the window and walked back down the terminal, his steps calm, measured, unshaken. He had entered this chapter with a broom and a badge. He walked forward now, with clarity, dignity, and a legacy that no insult could erase. Though the dust had settled inside Hartsfield-Jackson, Marcus Gilmore's story didn't end at the terminal gates. What started as a confrontation in a hallway became a wave of quiet transformation, echoing far beyond the polished floors and departure boards. Word of the incident spread quickly through Atlanta's tight-knit community of workers' rights advocates and social justice organizations. Local news outlets ran follow-up stories, not just about James Chisholm's fall from grace, but about Marcus, The janitor, who didn't shout, didn't retaliate, but stood his ground with dignity and let the truth speak louder than any revenge ever could. Soon, Marcus began receiving letters. Some were handwritten, others typed out, all expressing gratitude. A school teacher from Decatur wrote, "I shared your story with my students. You showed them that real courage doesn't always wear a uniform. It sometimes holds a broom." A Vietnam veteran said Marcus reminded him of soldiers who stood firm under pressure without losing their humanity. An invitation arrived in the mail from the Atlanta Workers Alliance, asking Marcus to speak at a community forum on workplace discrimination. At first, he was reluctant. He wasn't a public speaker, he was a worker, a janitor, someone used to being behind the scenes. But Tanya, ever perceptive, gently encouraged him. Baby people need to hear from someone real, someone who lived it. He agreed. The event was held at a modest neighborhood center, folding chairs lined up beneath fluorescent lights. The audience wasn't large, but it was full of intent listeners, restaurant workers, warehouse clerks, young cashiers, still learning how to navigate the world. Marcus stepped up to the podium, heart-pounding hands, slightly trembling. But when he began to speak, the nerves faded. "I never set out to be anyone's example," he told them. "I just knew what was right, and I knew what I couldn't allow. Sometimes the only way to make change is to stay standing when it's easier to walk away." His words struck a chord, not because they were polished, but because they were honest. After the forum, attendees lined up to shake his hand, to say thank you, to tell him they saw themselves in his story. Back at the airport, the shift was undeniable. Angela Winston's efforts had resulted in new employee task forces where janitors, security guards, and ground staff finally had a seat at the table. Monthly town halls gave employees a forum to raise concerns without fear. And on the wall outside the HR department, someone had posted an anonymous sign, "The janitor changed everything." Even the language people used began to shift. Marcus noticed younger employees correcting co-workers who spoke disrespectfully, citing what happened with James as a turning point. The name had become shorthand for the kind of behavior no one wanted to tolerate anymore. Marcus never chased recognition, but what he earned instead was something far deeper: respect. And in the hearts of those who had once felt invisible, his story planted seeds of courage. The ripples he created didn't end. They kept moving outward and onward, changing tides wherever they touched. One chilly evening, as Marcus wrapped up paperwork in his modest new office, tucked behind the facilities wing, there was a gentle knock on the open door. A young baggage handler, barely out of high school by the look of him, stood there shifting nervously, a small box wrapped in plain brown paper tucked under one arm. "Hey, Mr. Gilmore," the young man said, his voice cracking slightly with nerves. This is for you." Marcus looked up, surprised. "For me?" The handler nodded. "Just a thank you for everything." He placed the box on Marcus's desk and turned to leave, but Marcus stopped him with a kind smile. "Hold on now," he said warmly. "What's your name, Devontae?" he replied. "Second shift. Just started 3 months ago. I heard everything. What you did, it gave a lot of us courage." Marcus carefully unwrapped the box. Inside, cushioned in tissue paper, was a sleek, dark pen, engraved with gold letters, "Gilmore, stand tall." Marcus held it in his hands as if it were made of glass. The weight of it was more than physical. It carried meaning, memory, and quiet honor. "I don't know what to say," Marcus murmured. "You already said it," Devontae replied, "when you didn't back down." Marcus rose and gave him a firm handshake. "You keep your head up, son, and remember, speak with your work, but never be afraid to use your voice." That night, Marcus placed the pen on the corner of his desk, beside his clock-in badge and an old photo of his family. It wasn't a trophy or a promotion. It was something greater, a sign that even small acts of decency could ripple outward, touching lives he never expected. In a place filled with noise and movement, this simple gesture echoed the loudest. A month had passed since James Chisholm's fall from grace, and yet the ripple effects still echoed quietly throughout the vast corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson. Though the airport's pace remained relentless, airplanes arriving and departing like clockwork, announcements booming overhead, and crowds endlessly shifting, there was something different in the air. A subtle change, like a current beneath the surface, and Marcus Gilmore felt it with every step he took. That evening, after wrapping up a meeting with his newly assigned facilities team, Marcus found himself drawn to a particular place, gate D14. The stretch of hallway looked ordinary to anyone passing through, just another spot along the endless river of travelers. But to Marcus, it was sacred ground. He walked slowly, his polished work shoes clicking softly against the gleaming tile. The lights above cast a silver sheen on the floor, flawless, spotless. That was no accident. This was the very place where James had called him lazy, reducing years of honest labor to a single venomous word. Marcus paused at the spot where it had happened. The memory came back like a slow-building echo. James's scowl, the sharp word spoken under breath, the quiet gasp from nearby staff. But this time, the memory didn't burn. It settled in his chest, with weight but without pain. He had survived it. More than that, he had overcome it. From down the hall, a soft squeak of rubber wheels on tile approached. A young janitor, a woman this time, pushed a mop bucket and wrung out a clean cloth. She moved with care, scrubbing a scuff mark that no one else might have noticed. Marcus watched her for a moment, then stepped closer. "Doing a good job," he said gently. She looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled in recognition. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Gilmore. No need for titles. Marcus is just fine." She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's an honor. Everyone talks about what you did. You gave people like me hope." Marcus offered her the same kind of nod he used to crave, subtle, respectful, and sincere. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who believed something better was possible. He continued walking, after that, passing through the corridor that had once felt like a gauntlet. Now, it felt like a monument, an invisible reminder of a silent war that had been won not with fists or fire, but with truth, patience, and courage. As he made his way to the exit, Marcus passed a row of travelers seated with their luggage, oblivious to the quiet transformation that had taken place in the terminal around them. That was how it should be, he thought. They didn't need to know the details. The important part was that justice had been served, and that dignity long denied had finally been restored. Before leaving, Marcus turned back one last time. The light above gate D14 flickered briefly, then glowed steadily. And in that moment, he understood what it truly meant to come full circle. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. One of the busiest travel hubs in the world, never truly slept. Even in the quietest hours of the night, the place pulsed with quiet motion. Mechanics checking tarmacs, cleaners polishing floors, night shift security guards offering nods of recognition to familiar faces. To most travelers, it was just a stop on a journey, a space to move through. But for the people who worked there, people like Marcus Gilmore, it was a world of its own, a living ecosystem of effort, labor, and unseen devotion. Since the day James Chisholm was escorted out of the terminal in disgrace, the airport hadn't just continued operating, it had transformed. There was no grand speech or public ceremony, no confetti to mark the shift. Instead, the change revealed itself in quiet moments, managers treating staff with more empathy, HR departments finally taking complaints seriously, janitors lifting their heads a little higher as they pushed carts through crowded halls. Marcus's story, though not officially documented in any report or press release, became a quiet legend. It was passed on in whispers during coffee breaks, shared in onboarding conversations with new hires, and even brought up in management workshops as a case study in dignity and accountability. At first, Marcus had been hesitant to speak about what had happened. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He hadn't stood up to James for recognition. He had done it to preserve his self-respect, to make sure no one else had to swallow the same injustice in silence. But over time, he came to understand the power of his experience. The story didn't belong only to him. It belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or mistreated at their workplace. Community organizations took notice. A local workers' advocacy group invited Marcus to speak at a small roundtable event. Then came a podcast interview, a feature in a regional labor newsletter. Each time, Marcus approached the platform with humility, choosing not to focus on the drama of James's downfall, but rather the strength of collective action and the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. Change doesn't always come from loud voices, he told one audience. Sometimes it comes from quiet ones who simply refuse to back down. Angela Winston also saw a rise in her influence. Internally, she was asked to lead new diversity and equity initiatives across multiple terminals. Her reputation for fearless integrity earned her a consulting role on the airport's inclusivity board. Colleagues from other airports reached out for advice, eager to learn how Hartsfield-Jackson had handled such a volatile situation with transparency and justice. As for Marcus, his role in facilities coordination turned out to be a perfect fit. He found joy in solving logistical problems, in mentoring younger staff members, and in knowing that his presence at the table meant janitorial voices were no longer absent from decisions that impacted them. He carried with him not just a clipboard and a schedule, but the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had stared down injustice and refused to flinch. One afternoon, as he walked through the terminal toward a maintenance check-in, a small girl ran past him, pulling a polka-dot suitcase. Her laughter echoed as her mother called out, chasing after her with a harried smile. Marcus chuckled softly. Life went on. The airport hadn't become perfect, but it had become better. And above all, it had remembered something essential, that no matter how high someone's title and no matter how lowly someone's role might seem, every person deserved to be treated with fairness, dignity, and humanity. The day James called Marcus lazy had once threatened to break him, but instead it had ignited a reckoning. And from that hardship, a new kind of hope had been born, one that soared higher than any plane ever could. Thank you for journeying through this tale of high-stakes drama in one of the world's busiest airports. From that single hateful word to the final decision in the boardroom, we've witnessed how arrogance, entitlement, and bigotry can unravel in the face of courage and unity. Marcus, once dismissed as a lazy janitor, rose above injustice to become a beacon of fairness and a reminder that every individual, no matter their job title, deserves respect. If this story resonated with you, consider how each of us holds the power to confront wrongs and stand up for what's right. We hope it inspired you to never underestimate the quiet resilience living in humble places. If you found value in this story, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Spread this powerful message so more people can learn that change can start anywhere, even with a broom and a heart full of resolve.